somewhere in the Cotswolds, a man who knew nothing about farming built a system that every farmer in Britain would want, and not one of them could copy it. That is not irony. That is the point. Because what Jeremy Clarkson constructed on 1,000 acres of Oxfordshire farmland between 2008 and 2025 was not a television show. It was not a farm shop. It was not a celebrity vanity project funded by television money. It was a vertically integrated content and agricultural enterprise with a media company underwriting every loss, every bad harvest, every planting disaster, and every failed crop yield. And the farming establishment, the people who had spent generations understanding the land, never saw it coming. They were looking at the wrong thing entirely. Here's where this story actually begins. Not in 2021 when the cameras arrived, not in 2019 when Clarkson bought the farm, but in the fundamental economics of British agriculture, a sector where the average farm income in the United Kingdom sits below £30,000 per year, where suicide rates among farmers run at twice the national average, and where the removal of EU basic payment subsidies after Brexit left an entire industry searching for a replacement income model that simply did not exist. Clarkson, accidentally, brilliantly, or both, built one. And Amazon paid for it. The figure that matters here is not £144. That number, the profit from Diddley, Squat's first trading year, has been repeated so many times it has lost its power to shock. The figure that matters is the one sitting behind it. The £10 to £12 million that Amazon Prime Video pays annually for Clarkson's farm per series, per year, arriving reliably regardless of whether the harvest fails, the pigs escape, or the council refuses planning permission for a restaurant. That number did not appear in the farming press. It was not discussed at the Oxford Real Farming Conference. It was not modeled by the Agriculture and Horticulture Development Board as a potential income diversification strategy. It was treated as a television story, a celebrity story, a story about a man who used to present a car program. Nobody was watching the structure. Jeremy Charles Robert Clarkson, born in Doncaster in 1960, the son of a Paddington Bear toy salesman and a woman who turned a failing family business into a modest success, spent most of his adult life building an audience. Not intentionally, not strategically. He just kept finding things that made people angry and then explaining them in short, punchy sentences on television. By the time he purchased Diddley Squat Farm for £6 million in 2008, 1,000 acres of heavy Cotswold clay that had defeated better farmers than him for generations, he had built one of the most valuable personal audiences in British media. He did not know he was going to need it, but Amazon did. This is the part that the farming press missed entirely. Amazon Prime Video did not commission Clarkson's farm because Jeremy Clarkson is a farmer. They commissioned it because Jeremy Clarkson has an audience that will follow him anywhere, into a tractor cab, into a planning meeting, into a field of failing cauliflowers, and stay there. The farm was not the product Amazon was buying. The audience was. The farm was simply the location where the audience could be delivered week after week, in circumstances authentic enough that no writer's room could have manufactured them. It is not a farm. It is a delivery mechanism. And that distinction, missed entirely by the agricultural establishment, is what makes the system impossible to copy. Because here is what the National Farmers Union's commentary never fully grasped. Every single element of Clarkson's income architecture depends on prior assets that no working farmer in Britain possesses. The audience, built over 30 years of television. The personal brand, sharpened by controversy at the BBC to a level of recognizability that most politicians would surrender their careers to achieve. The production infrastructure, the crew, the editors, the narrative instinct that turns a failed potato harvest into a piece of content that 4 million people watch on a Wednesday evening. Remove any one of those elements and the system collapses entirely. What remains is just 1,000 acres of heavy clay in Oxfordshire that lost money for generations before. Clarkson arrived and would lose it again the moment he left. And yet the system he built on top of that farm is the most instructive business model in British agriculture in a generation. Not because farmers can copy it, but because it reveals with complete and unforgiving clarity exactly what British farming has been missing for 30 years, a guaranteed income floor. Now, here is the part that almost nobody covering this story has fully connected. The crisis that Clarkson's farm accidentally documented, falling farm incomes, rising input costs, a planning system designed for a world that no longer exists, a retail sector that extracts margin from primary producers at rates that make commercial viability nearly impossible. That crisis did not begin when Brexit removed basic payment subsidies. It existed throughout the entire period of subsidy dependency. The subsidies masked it. The removal exposed it. And Clarkson arrived with a camera at precisely the moment the mask came off. That is not a coincidence. That is why the show works. Gerald Cooper, the dry stone waller, the man who has worked the land around Chipping Norton for longer than most of the show's viewers have been alive, became the emotional spine of a television series, not because a casting director found him, but because he was already there, already saying things in that particular Oxfordshire drawl that made 4 million people feel simultaneously educated, moved, and quietly guilty about where their food comes from. You cannot manufacture Gerald Cooper. You can only find him. And you only find him if you buy the farm first. The farming establishment had 30 years to point a camera at Gerald Cooper. They chose industry reports instead. Here is the counterintuitive core of the entire enterprise. Diddley Squat Farm is financially structured to lose money on its agricultural operations, not accidentally, not as a side effect of incompetence, though incompetence is present in generous quantities and deliberately documented. The farm loses money on agriculture because agricultural losses are content. A failed barley crop is an episode. A planning refusal is a series arc. A confrontation with West Oxfordshire District Council over a restaurant license is, as it turned out, a marketing campaign that no budget could have bought and no publicist would have had the nerve to run. The council thought they were the regulatory authority. They were the co-writers. Every refusal raised the stakes. Every raised stake increased the audience. Every increased audience made the Amazon renewal more certain and the annual payment more secure. The people trying to stop the farm from expanding were, in practice, guaranteeing its financial survival. The planning committee for West Oxfordshire District Council generated more positive coverage for Diddley Squat than the entire PR budget of any farm shop in Britain could have achieved in a decade. The failure is the product. Not a regrettable side effect, the product itself. And this is where the story stops being about one farm in Oxfordshire and starts being about something that touches every agricultural business in Britain. Caleb Cooper, the farm manager who was working at Diddley Squat when Clarkson purchased it, who did not audition for a television role, who has never taken a media training course in his life, who delivers his assessments of Clarkson's agricultural decisions with an expression that contains equal measures of professional despair and barely contained affection, became, within 2 series, the most commercially valuable unscripted television character in British broadcasting. Not the most famous farmer on television, the most commercially valuable unscripted character. In any genre, his social media following grew to a scale that made agricultural machinery companies, farming publications, and rural brands queue to be associated with him. The brand value attached to that association is not small. It is not incidental. It runs parallel to the Amazon income stream as a second revenue channel that did not exist before 2021 and required no additional capital investment to create. Caleb Cooper was already there. Clarkson just pointed a camera at him. The Hawkstone Brewery launched in 2021, generating £7.8 million in its first measurable year, growing to £21.3 million by 2025, valued at approximately £75 million with a reported £50 million approach from Carlsberg. Rejected follows the identical logic. The beer is competent. Plenty of British craft beers are competent. The beer is not the product. The provenance is the product. The story of the barley grown on Cotswold clay, brewed into a lager that you can buy in 2,000 pubs across Britain, with a face on the label that an audience of 4 million people already trust. That is what Carlsberg was buying. Not the brewery, the narrative attached to the brewery. And the narrative is inseparable from the Amazon deal that made the narrative possible. Remove the television series and Hawkstone is a craft lager in a crowded market with a celebrity endorsement. Keep the television series and Hawkstone is a vertically integrated, Agricultural brand with a distribution story that no marketing budget can replicate. Carlsberg found out what it was worth too late. Lisa Hogan, Clarkson's partner. The woman who stood in a farm shop built from £44,000 of initial assets and watched it generate £1.34 million in its first year of serious trading, who negotiated the 16-mile sourcing radius imposed by West Oxfordshire District Council and turned it into a supply chain story that made every product in the shop feel like a document of local provenance, understood something, before most commentators noticed it. Constraints create character. The planning conditions that were designed to limit the operation were, in practice, the brand brief. Every local supplier found within 16 miles was a character in the story. Every character in the story was content. Every piece of content was audience. Every unit of audience was income. She did not fight the constraint. She turned it into the product. The farm shop now draws an estimated 250,000 visitors annually, not because the produce is uniquely superior, because the shop is the physical manifestation of a story that visitors have been watching on their televisions. The queue is not a problem to be solved. The queue is evidence that the story worked. That is not a farm shop model. That is an experience model. And the distinction matters enormously for anyone trying to understand why the shop at Diddley Squat works when identical farm shops with better locations and more product range do not. Stand back. Look at the full picture. A farm purchased for £6 million in 2008, now valued at £12.5 million on its land alone and £45 million as a total enterprise. A farm shop built on £44,000 of assets, generating an estimated £2 million in annual revenue with 250,000 visitors per year. A brewery growing at 134% annually, valued at £75 million, turning down £50 million acquisition approaches because the independent value trajectory makes the offer look premature. A pub purchased and renovated for £1 million, employing 146 people, with 360 car park spaces, a detail which tells you everything about expected footfall and nothing about what you would have predicted from a Cotswolds rural pub. An Amazon income stream of £10 to £12 million per year, sitting underneath all of it as a guaranteed floor that makes every other risk in the portfolio manageable. That is the flywheel. Amazon funds the farm. The farm generates the content. The content grows the audience. The audience validates the brand. The brand sells the beer, fills the shop, books the pub, and makes the next Amazon renewal negotiation easier than the last one. Every element feeds every other element. Remove one and the other slow down. Keep them all turning and the system is, by the standards of British agricultural economics, almost frictionless. Here is what is genuinely uncertain. The flywheel depends on Jeremy Clarkson remaining at its center. It depends on Amazon continuing to see the audience value that justifies the annual payment. It depends on a planning environment in West Oxfordshire that, for all its comedic obstruction, has not yet found a mechanism to fundamentally restrict the operation. Any one of those dependencies, removed, changes the calculation significantly. The £45 million valuation is a story valuation, not a land valuation. The land is worth £12.5 million. The other £32.5 million is narrative. And narrative, unlike clay soil, does not hold its value automatically. It has to be earned again each series. But here is the thing that the farming establishment, the industry press, and the agricultural policy community have not yet fully reckoned with. Clarkson did not create the crisis in British farming that his show documents. He arrived at a crisis that already existed. He simply built, accidentally, brilliantly, probably both, the only income model in recent British agricultural history that makes 1,000 acres of heavy, Cotswold clay financially viable without subsidy dependency. Not because he is a better farmer than the people who came before him, because he had an audience they didn't. That is not a farming story. That is a British economic story about what happens when an entire industry loses its guaranteed income floor and discovers, 20 years too late, that it never built an alternative. Clarkson built one. It took a man who knew nothing about farming to show the farming industry what it was missing. That is not entertainment. That is the diagnosis. If you found this as useful as we found it to build, do subscribe and tap the notification bell. It helps more than you might expect. And drop us a comment below. We'd genuinely like to know, do you think any farmer in Britain could replicate even one piece of this system? Or is the whole thing impossible without the audience that came first? There's a video on screen right now that connects directly to this story. We think you'll find it answers a question this one deliberately left open. Thank you, as always, for watching.